The book is called Dracul. So I was at the Bram Stoker Awards because of Forsaken, and Dacre Stoker was there, and we ended up sitting next to each other for a book signing. So we spent about an hour just talking, and he kept asking me questions about my book doctor years and the stuff that I had ghostwritten and just history things. And I kept picking his brain for anything I could on Bram Stoker because I've got a living Stoker relative right next to me. I wanted to know everything I could. I told him about a short story that I'd written years back about Bram getting cornered by Dracula in an alley, little things like that. So we talked for like an hour and said our goodbyes, and that was kind of it. And I didn't think I would see the guy again, or at least I would maybe be in contact with him or whatever. But he kept trying to grab me in the hallways and saying things like, "Well, we need to sit down and talk. I've got something I want to run by you. I've got something I want to run by you." But it was kind of hectic, so we just weren't able to do that. And then on the last day, he invited my wife and I out to breakfast. And halfway through it, he springs this on me. He says, "Well, I got to be honest about something. I actually knew who you were before I sat down at that signing table. That was kind of an interview. My family and I have been looking for somebody to write a prequel to Dracula for some time now, and we're curious to see if you would be interested in doing that. You'd have access to all of Bram Stoker's original notes, and that's kind of where he opened it. He sprung two things on me that really surprised me, and this is what really sealed the deal for me. He told me that Bram originally told Dracula and meant it to be a true story, which I didn't know. And he also told me that the publisher cut the first 102 pages out of the novel. So the original Dracula doesn't start with Jonathan Harker on the train, where I've read it a million times at this point. That's where it's always started for me. But there's actually 102 pages before that that the publisher took out. And the thinking was at the time, Jack the Ripper was very active in London, and the publisher felt that if they were to put out a book that claims that vampires are real and lays it out in a very in a fashion that makes sense, that it may scare people into actually believing it. And if you think about, like back in those days, seances, things like that were very common. People believed in the supernatural. And if you think about even War of the Worlds, like that radio broadcast, that was in the 50s. That was, 70 years later. And people, killed themselves when they heard that on the radio. They thought it was real. So the publisher had the foresight to think of what this could do. So Bram at the time, he needed the money. So he agreed to strip out all these pages. They went through and they made some edits to the book and basically turned it into a work of fiction. Bram did something very tricky, though, which we're still unraveling, and something that Dacre actually uncovered. In today's publishing world, if I write a book, I basically just work on the English version, then I turn it into my agent and my editor, and then they farm it out to all the other foreign countries. And everybody kind of works off the one edition when they do their translations. In Bram's day, it didn't work that way. So even though his English publisher made him take all these different things out, when he sent the manuscript off to Switzerland, when he sent it off to France, when he sent it off to Italy, he stuck a lot of this stuff back in. Now, because Dracula is so popular, and because it's in public domain, all the translations that are out there tend to be translations off the UK version. But what Dacre Stoker and his family have found, if they go back to the original Dracula manuscript, find first editions in foreign languages, and translate those first editions, the actual print copies, they're finding very different stories. And some of them, Dracula has a wife. There's other people in the castle. There are flying monkeys. There are some crazy things in that book that Bram snuck out there. And this stuff is still playing out. They're still finding things. But essentially, Dacre and I decided that we wanted to tell the story that Bram wasn't allowed to. The true portion of Dracul, why he believed vampires were real. And after writing that, I actually believe that he actually did believe that, because he got himself cremated at a time in history when people didn't do that. The author's note at the back at the end of Dracul is very telling. The first time that I met with Dacre to work on this project, his family had a cabin up in the Carolina Mountains, and we went up there for the weekend. And the second night we were there, he came out with this big old trunk of stuff and put it out on the table. And it was literally the things that were on Bram Stoker's desk when he wrote Dracula. And he had notes and a lot of strange things that I wouldn't have thought of. And some of them were on laundry receipts. He had a day timer, like a lot of Dracula was actually plotted out in a day timer, which makes sense because, if you think about, Monday this happened, Tuesday this happened, Wednesday this happened. So, he was a theater manager, so that was his way of getting that particular story organized. The tricky thing was there was so much of it, and it was just very unorganized. I mean, because we were literally just picking up scraps of paper that might have one sentence on them or a couple sentences and trying to piece all this stuff together. So we did our best to do that, and we kind of laid it all out and tried to get it in an order that felt like it belonged together. When we finished that, we wanted to verify the information we had. We didn't want to just put this out there. There are people that have doctorate degrees in Dracula. So you can't just make something like this up. Like they're going to question it. So when we finally felt that we had those first 102 pages reconstructed, we knew we had to verify them somehow. So I started researching the actual Dracula manuscript, and it turns out there's only one copy of it in existence. It was found in a barn in Pennsylvania, of all places. And Dacre actually believes it was traded for some Walt Whitman papers at one point. But a family, they were cleaning out this barn, they sold the property, and they found the Dracula manuscript in a box in their barn. It ended up selling at auction through Christie's for, I think, about $1 million to Paul Allen, the co-founder of Microsoft. So he had it at this time. So I reached out to his foundation and asked if there was any way we could get in there and take a look at it. And he said yes. So Dacre and I hopped on a plane. We went out to Seattle and we visited his foundation, and they locked us in a conference room. They took our cell phones away. A couple people stood over us like this, and they started wheeling in these giant leather bound boxes, and we started flipping through, and it was the original Dracula manuscript. Now the first thing we did was we looked at the very first page because we wanted to see where it started, and the very first page started with page 103. It was crossed out up at the top with the number 1 next to it, and the chapter was redone. So even that particular copy still doesn't have the missing pages, and that kind of, we thought we hit a dead end at that point. We didn't think it was going to take us anywhere, but then we started flipping through and we realized something. Like in today's world, if you're writing a book and you delete something, it's gone. But when you're working with a print copy back then, something off a typewriter, it didn't work that way. He actually drew a line through stuff. So when the editor made him take out those first 100 pages, then he went through the rest of the book and he deleted any scenes that referenced those 100 pages. So we started focusing very heavily on those deleted scenes, and we found this one tied into this event, this one tied into this event, this one tied into this one. And from that, we were able to establish that we had the timeline correct and we had his story in the proper order.